Hi, I'm Johanna Weaver, and you're listening to Tech Mirror, a podcast that talks about how humans shape technology and how technology is shaping our society. So in today's episode, we're going to delve into the world of digital rights. My guest is Brett Solomon, the co-founder and executive director of Access Now. Brett, welcome to Tech Mirror.
Thanks so much for having me.
We are absolutely delighted to have you. Now, Brett, you have had a very impressive career in advocacy. Can I ask where your interest in advocacy or protest first came from?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I mean, my thinking has always been around, social justice and human rights, and like, how do we use the skills, the tools that we have available to create change and to ensure the enjoyment for rights across the board. After working as the event coordinator at Oxfam, I moved into kind of policy advocacy work on International Youth Parliament and then to Amnesty. And meanwhile, I got a master's in international human rights law after doing a law degree. And I think the things just started to converge, particularly when technology came into the equation.
And so the organisation that you're now the executive director of, Access Now, is one of the largest digital rights groups in the world. And you have a very large staff. You run the world's largest human rights online conference, RightsCon, which I'm sure we'll get to. You founded Access Now back in 2009. And if I understand correctly, it was around the context of what was happening in Iran and the Iranian election. Can you just maybe talk us through, before we dive into what it was that you did, what was happening in Iran back in 2009, just to refresh our memory?
So it was Ahmadinejad was the president of Iran, and there was elections happening, and these kinds of results started to emerge that were outrageously inflated in his favour. People might remember the kind of, I think, the enduring images of people with the green thumb, people who had voted. It was basically the tagline, or the hashtag actually, even at that point, was "Where is my vote?" And so, we've seen again in the last couple of years, or in this last year, the way in which the kind of the street can erupt, and also the online environment can erupt in response to injustice. And unfortunately, we've seen the consequences of a nervous and exposed authoritarian state and how it uses technology to try and silence a population and also to try and cut it off from the rest of the world. And that was the entry point for Access Now.
So you founded Access Now in that context. And what was it that you set Access Now up to do? So
the original mission was to defend and extend the digital rights of users at risk. In fact, there was an original mission, if we go right back, which was more about mobilizing for global digital freedom. That was the tagline. And so, we've been through lots of iterations, but the mission today and the mission that's been in place for a long time is about defending and extending the digital rights of people and communities at risk. And that's what drives the organisation, and also RightsCon, which is the annual event that we run.
When I think of that period of time, 2009 in Iran, but then also the Arab Spring, which sort of happens in 2011. So you have Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria. And I understand you were on the ground at Tahrir Square in 2011. And there was such a sense of optimism at that time that the internet was going to democratize, and not just bring democracy, but almost bring liberal democracy to the world. And we look back on that now, and perhaps with a sense that there was an element of arrogance that we thought that was going to happen. When you were on the ground, did you have that sense of optimism?
I don't know how much we were sort of back then thinking about it in terms of like the positive and the negative, or the kind of enabling or the disenabling. It was more just like a job needs to be done, right? Like it was like the internet's been cut off in Egypt because Mubarak is concerned that the online sphere is going to topple him, how the hell do we get it back on, right? Like, how do we respond to, the possibilities of citizen media? I mean, when 2009 was happening in Iran, like, we were receiving all of this content from colleagues in Tehran saying, there's 250,000 people in the main square, and Fars News Agency, which is the news agency of the Iranian government, was issuing a statement saying there's 150 people in the main square protesting. And before citizen media, we were reliant either upon the official news agency or a foreign correspondent. So we would go to CNN and BBC, etc., and say, "Hey, look at this video! Like, look what's happening." And the editors were like, "Well, how do you substantiate that? And how do you? What's your accreditation to be able to ensure authenticity, etc.?" I think we need to go back to that point when citizen media was not actually a thing, in the sense that, news would come through that was, as I say, through official channels. But now every bit of news has somebody with a mobile phone, obviously. And so it was like, well, we need to be part of the communication channel to get this content to the world. And so, over time, obviously, it's become much clearer. And I spoke at an event, with a lead agency on internet shutdowns. We track internet shutdowns around the world. And, I do fear maybe the internet has actually become the enemy of the population. And maybe the internet has become the friend of the dictator. And so that shift has been obviously happening, that recognition has been happening for some time. And so the question then becomes, how do you limit the negative effects of technology, and how do you maximize the positive effects? As a civil society organization, we need to pick our battles and understand, like, where the most egregious breaches are, and, like, where do we think we can have a role in responding to them?
And I think that's a good segue into the concept of digital rights. So when you talk about digital rights, how should our listeners be conceiving of what digital rights are, and this tension between digital rights and human rights? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think traditionally it sat within the civil and political rights framework of the broader spectrum of human rights. So freedom of expression, opinion, association, privacy, and access to information. Like, those are the 5 key rights that would traditionally sit under the concept of digital rights. And all of those rights are radically, deeply affected by technology. When you think about, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the right to privacy, the right to join with others in protest, like, all of these things are now fundamentally and existentially impacted by technology. But the pandemic, I think, also woke the world up to the fact that it's not just about your civil and political rights, it's actually about your economic, social, and cultural rights as well. So, my right to an education, is directly impacted by my ability to be able to access the internet. Your livelihood, your right to a sustainable livelihood, your right to healthcare, all of those rights are intermediated by technology. And so when we think about human rights in the digital age, I think, which is a useful framing, what does human rights mean in the digital age, which is currently where we're at? How does the whole spectrum of rights, and from our perspective, those whose rights are most at risk, because that's within our mission. So people whose right to freedom of expression is, like, radically impacted negatively and positively by technology. So, for example, when government decides to intentionally turn off the network, direct impact upon that right in the digital environment. But it obviously doesn't just play out in the digital environment; it plays out in the offline world as well. And so that sort of merging of offline rights and online rights, I think it's impossible now to think about human rights in the absence of technology. And I think digital rights and human rights, in a way, have become one. Human rights scholars might question that. I think that traditional human rights organisations also struggle with the idea about how to, understand the right to privacy in a physical space, but don't necessarily know how to protect it in a digital space. And so from the human rights community, there's a real challenge in trying to update our understanding, update our advocacy, update our solidarity.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm certainly one of the people who sits firmly in the camp of that human rights are now inseparable from technology. And I think it's often easy to be overwhelmed by the enormity of the task and the gravity of what is at stake in this field. So perhaps can we start the next set of questions around what do you think one of the wins has been recently in this space, perhaps domestically or internationally, that you think is something we should be celebrating?
Because I
insert awkward pause.
Insert awkward pause. Because when you said celebrating, I was like /commiserating. It's not that there haven't been wins, and I don't want to give the wrong impression, but I can give you two examples of I think where there's been maybe a slowing down of losses, which is a win. I mentioned the idea of internet shutdowns, and we've seen 185 internet shutdowns in 2022. So last year we just released our report now on looking back and annually in 35 countries. And so the thing about the internet shutdown is that this intentional disruption of the network, specifically by government, largely to stop the free flow of information to a particular population or within a particular region. And we have managed as civil society, we have managed now to do a range of different things, which I think are really important. One is we've actually named the internet shutdown as a thing, and we have a agreed upon definition of it. We also now have many, many places of recognition that an internet shutdown is a violation of international law. And that has been agreed upon from within the UN Human Rights Council, all the way through to statements from G7 ministers who call for a cease and desist on shutdowns. I mean, we've really managed to name it, to create norms around it, and also to create a coalition around it, like a public coalition around it, which means that the governments are understanding the consequences of this matter. They know that if they shut down the internet, that there will be real world consequences, both in terms of political consequences, economic ones, social ones, and also questioning their ability, and legitimacy to govern. And so it's really like that. And I think as a result of that, we've seen less shutdowns happen than we would otherwise have seen. We've also, as a coalition, managed to stop internet shutdowns from occurring. And that's probably the least exciting thing that I've ever said. But, we know, because, look, nothing happened. Like, it doesn't actually, you can't really put out a press release on that. But we have seen, we know in 3 or 4 occasions, including in Kenya, that a shutdown did not happen, probably as a result of the work that was done preemptively. I think the other thing, maybe we would have seen 250 internet shutdowns. We only had 2 new countries enter the shutdown bad boy in inverted commas list, which was Tunisia and Armenia. So that's good. So we've seen a slowing of the growth of the number of countries. We also know that once the government shuts down the internet once, it is very likely to do it again. So if we can keep that number of countries down, that means that hopefully we're unlikely to see a growth in the number of shutdowns. The second one, which I just mentioned, which is extremely important in terms of human rights in the digital age or digital rights, which is the issue of spyware.
Yeah.
We've seen this like outrageous, just almost unspeakable growth of the surveillance industry. Targeted spyware that's focused particularly on journalists and bloggers and human rights defenders and opposition parties and you name it, defenseless folks who are subject to an acute invasion of their privacy, access to cameras, microphones, data, address books, etc. And this has happened with impunity for so many years now. And I think we have really managed to both name it. Again, I think we've managed to show how it demonstrate how it's a breach of international human rights law. But more importantly, the political winds have shifted on this one. The US government, as a result of advocacy and the work that's been done by Citizen Lab and Amnesty Tech and Access Now, we and others, we have managed to encourage and now see the US government put certain companies, including NSO Group, on the entity list, the Department of Commerce and Treasury entity list, and now also a ban on US government agencies from purchasing and using spyware. This is a massive deal.
Yeah.
But we're still seeing spyware, and that's where the commiserations come. We're still seeing shutdowns.
Yeah, and certainly when I was framing that question, I was particularly thinking about spyware and Biden's recent executive order, which I do. Yeah. I hear what you're saying in terms of the commiseration. I mean, that order is carefully worded as well.
It is.
But I do think it's important to celebrate these wins when they do happen, because they don't come along all that often, and that is, as you say, the result of an enormous amount of advocacy. So, from the Tech Policy Design Centre to all of those who've worked particularly on the spyware issue, we really do say thank you for your advocacy and work in that space.
I will say you're welcome on behalf of everybody back.
Gorgeous. You're listening to Tech Mirror, a podcast from the Australian National University's Tech Policy Design Centre. If you like what you're hearing, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating, or even better, leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. This really only takes a few moments of your time, but it does help us to promote the podcast and get more people involved in these important conversations. Now, enough interruptions from me. Let's dive back into this episode. I do just want to acknowledge here as well that India is one of the countries that is the most, is the most prolific in terms of internet shutdowns. We've had a number of Indian guests on the show talking about the way that they're working to, build technology, build a policy ecosystem, in part because they're looking to hold the Indian government more to account. So what do you think Australia should be doing in this space? What is Australia's role in terms of enhancing digital rights and I guess progressing these issues?
Can I just reflect for a second on India? Because I think it's really important that people understand what an unfortunately powerful role they have in not just the 1.3 or 4 billion population or even more, but also the impact on the region and the impact on this whole idea about as the world's largest democracy, and I'm sort of air quoting that. Seeing the way that the Indian government has shut down the internet 84 times this last year, and they're going to hit that record again in 2023. The way that it has given itself the authority, unlawful authority and through the states, not just through the federal government, to shut down the internet for extended periods of time, including Jammu Kashmir, but all over the country, and for in ways that really negatively impact people's ability to live their lives and live their lives safely. And it's combined not just with the shutdown work, but amendment to the IT rules and on fake news and on the ability to have content removed, etc. That's kind of unacceptable to the state. There's very undefined definitions of what sort of when if it's a threat to national security or whether it's creating further instability, etc. So like India is really it's really a problem, unfortunately, and I think the Modi government has demonstrated for many years now the lengths that it's willing to go through to both legislatively and politically to take control of the digital sphere as it moves everybody into a biometric system as well, which is also very interesting and for Australia too.
I think this is really important. So what is it that we should be doing to engage with the government? Because I think it really is important to separate the government from the people in this instance as well. And so what is it, and maybe it is the question that I asked before about what is it that Australia should be doing, but also, what can you do in that circumstance?
There's lots of things that can be done, and maybe this is coming back to your first question about kind of, advocacy strategies and but which is a lot of what we think about is like, wait a second, this isn't quite right. Like, how do we get it right? And, the Supreme Court in India has been at times a very effective mechanism to be able to bring cases to try and overrule current government policy. And so I think that, bringing amicus briefs, building up, helping to build up civil society to be able to bring those briefs, providing amicus support for into the court has also been very useful. But I'm a very strong believer in the way in which civil society itself should be empowered, like the local civil society should be empowered and enabled to really do much of that advocacy, combined with, whether it be legally or otherwise, combined with international solidarity. And it's unfortunate that, and this is a real matter, that civil society is under attack in so many countries around the world. And so whilst I'm saying, empowering and enabling local civil society, and we can get to like the diplomatic piece of Australia as well. But the real very, very concerning matter is that the organisations that are focused on protecting the open internet and protecting the digital rights of its users are really like in danger.
Yeah.
And that's a real issue.
That's something that I am particularly conscious of as well. So it's interesting to me, the conversations, that you can have privately where people will express the concern of the point you make there about that they are in danger, that either individually but also their organisations at risk if they are speaking out is the very reason why they need to speak out. And I think that that tension is something that we just take for granted in Australia, that you can critique and criticise. Yes, exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make. Yeah.
Because, it's the thing is that that the rights that they're trying to protect are the ones that are being taken away from them in the as they try to protect them. And so, and that's what that idea about Computer Crimes Act, defamation that moves from civil to criminal when it moves online, according to new legislation, reputational attacks, the spyware stuff that we talked about, legal attacks, like that's what's happening to local civil society. And the reason why it is so problematic and why we need to bring Australia in and why we need a democratic state to make diplomatic representations and other things, is because the decisions that are being made really are generational. And that's, yourself, like you've seen things pass through the Australian Parliament that are going to have consequences for a very long time. Yeah. And I've been involved in the work on surveillance and spyware after the Patriot Act was passed in the US. And it took ourselves and many other organizations, including the EFF, years of work to get a slight repeal on the Patriot Act. And so the things that are being passed is just like this unbelievable reliance in a way on like local civil society to be the buffer zone between where we are and where we don't want to go, and yet a lack of recognition that those very same members of civil society are actually very vulnerable themselves. But to Australia. So I think that I don't think it's a happy story, to be honest. I think that Australia has been both absent at times when it needed to be present. And I'm thinking about things like the Freedom Online Coalition, which is this coalition of states that are committed, to an open internet and to responding to having a set of standards that they can meet and also themselves and also, advocate for. Mm-hmm. But Australia hasn't really been there in the way that it needs to. I think Australia in the region hasn't been there. Fast forward to a number of years under the Morrison government where at the behest, I think, of Dutton, where you've seen Australia's role in the Five Eyes, where in a way Australia's been testing ground for, proposals on encryption, proposals and laws on, interception, and access to information and data via the telcos and the telecoms. And so I feel as though, if I'm frank about it, that Australia has not been a positive force for the protection of digital rights, and even just in terms of its form of AusAid, its budget, like recognizing if you just take the sort of some of the pointier ends of it out of the equation, the issues around intersection between technology and development. If you just look at it from a purely development perspective, not a human rights perspective, but how do we enable, if we're going to be providing support to the region, how do we enable support for, connectivity, just as a basic like this? How do we make sure that people have a choice to be able to connect to the internet in, name Fiji, Tuvalu, wherever, right around us? And if you recognise that, contemporary development, education, healthcare, all the things that we've talked about are now reliant on connectivity, that should be a thing that we should have been investing in for a long time if you're concerned about a development agenda, putting to the side the other stuff around, surveillance and encryption and access to information in people's, private information. So I think that I would say that, on the India case, it's difficult for Australia. Again, to be frank, it's difficult for Australia because some of the things that we're doing domestically are hard to be able to then go and advocate internationally on. Governments know what's going on. They see, what's happened in terms of the demands on removal of content, back in Germany with, some of the earlier laws that they passed. They also see the powers of the e-safety commissioner. And I think that we need to understand that if we're going to be doing things domestically, they can be taken and out of the rule of law and applied in a situation which is very, very concerning.
I do want to speak a little bit about RightsCon, which is a bit of a step change, but not really, actually, in the sense that what you're talking about there is the fact that you need to build these coalitions of people and organisations to be coming together to address these issues, which are tough issues, and to underscore that generational point, which with the decisions that we're making about technology policy today really are shaping our future for tomorrow. What are some of the key themes that are going to be front and centre at RightsCon this year?
Thanks. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we've touched on, which is going to be on the agenda. We got 2,000 submissions for sessions,
Wow.
which is just crazy. I know, and we've said yes. I mean, which is also crazy. There's going to be 600 sessions at RightsCon this year.
Are you so proud of what you've built? It's extraordinary.
There's a lot of people who are doing incredible work in this space, who are facing really extraordinary challenges, and and many of those people will be at RightsCon. So it's June 5 to 9 in Costa Rica and online as well, and people can still register. If this assuming so people can still register. So there's many of the things that we discussed on, like, surveillance, on the right to privacy, on freedom of expression, on fake news. Obviously, AI is going to be top of the agenda. Whether it's
have a bingo card with ChatGPT on it.
Yeah, how many times will it be shared? But the good thing about the RightsCon agenda is that it moves according to the interests of the community, because we had 80 people on the programming committee that looked through the 2,000 sessions, decided on the 600, and they'll be, both online and offline, depending on the session. But I think that AI is going to be, there's just been such an extraordinary explosion of technology around that space, and now there's an understanding within the community about the consequences. But I'll raise two other things that I think are really important. One is the issue of humanitarian response. I mean, really about the intersection between technology and conflict. And I think that we've known about this for many years, but now there's like a popular understanding of the consequences and the interplay between technology and contemporary warfare. And we really need to get a handle on this, because, our traditional frameworks around, Geneva Conventions, etc., like, they're struggling, and the traditional organizations like the ICRC and the Red Cross, are grappling with the fact that warfare is now cyber warfare, and the consequences of it are, just as deadly. And the other area that I think, and so there's a whole stream on that, and the other area that I think is going to be really, really important and fascinating is to now bring the digital rights agenda to the climate crisis. There's a lot of talk about technology and climate, but it goes all the way from, like, how does the algorithm on YouTube allow you to start, searching on climate change and ending up with climate change denialism, like that sort of stuff, all the way through the fact that we're now seeing on the Digital Security Helpline, which we run as an organisation, that about 15% of the cases of people who are coming with technical attacks on their devices or on their websites or wherever it might be are environmental actors. And so we need to grapple with that, because, there's no climate change protection without an empowered and a safe civil society on the climate front. And so there'll be lots of talk around that. And of course, Costa Rica is the most biodiverse country in the world. And so that means that there'll be a lot of focus on the environmental aspect of tech.
Look, I mean, those are two such worthy issues. And so I'm on the ICRC Global Board for digital threats, and we're just in the process. Yeah, we're just in the process at the moment of finalising our report. And, when that board was first stood up, it was pre-Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It really it couldn't be more timely, and I'll have a chat to you offline in terms of some of those discussions.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. All right, Brett, the final question we ask folks is recommendations. So books, podcasts, articles, Twitter. Who do you follow? Where do you recommend people go for information? Just as an easy question to wrap up.
I just finished a book yesterday, which is called Clara and the Sun. It's by
it's so good. Yeah.
And I started off kind of not liking it, and I ended up actually quite liking it. But I think the way, it's about the AF, the artificial friend of this young girl, kind of pairs up with, and the kind of humanity behind the algorithm, and then the sort of sentient being kind of emerging out of the robot. I thought that was really interesting. I would kind of quite recommend people to read that. I think it's got some really kind of what's the word? Kind of a natural kind of, like, it's sort of very genuine insight into like the relationship between man or between humans and machines. And then I would say, and I hope you don't mind if I plug this, but I mean, I think that the Access Now website, accessnow.org, has just got like a really good global coverage of like the things that are happening in the digital rights space. And the Access Now Express, which we put out weekly, it's a free newsletter, just goes out and it's like a summation of the things that we're tracking. I would encourage people to go to that and, 100 other things as well. But but thanks for the opportunity.
No problems, and plugs are definitely welcome. If you weren't going to, then I was. And also the podcast that you're regularly on as well, This Week in Cyberspace, is one that I'll plug for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So thank you so much, Brett, for joining us today, but also for all the work that you and Access Now do. Looking forward to partnering and collaborating with you more in the capacity of being at the Tech Policy Design Centre. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
Tech Mirror is a podcast of the Tech Policy Design Centre at the Australian National University. This episode was recorded on Ngunnawal lands with sound engineering by ANU Studio. Amy Denmead provided invaluable research support. Post-production is by Martin Franklin from East Coast Studio. Thanks for listening. Get in touch and get involved.